What's up, guys? I let the song go on a little longer than usual there. I'm not really sure why. I was kind of zoning out, and just kind of enjoying the song. And then I was like, hold on a minute, I have to actually start speaking now and make a podcast. So better get onto that part of it. I don't want like 3.5 minutes of intro music. So today we're going to continue with Hands from the Corner. I'm probably going to switch to some different podcast formats, look to get some guests on the podcast for you guys pretty soon. But for now, we're going to just plow on with this because I've been getting some good feedback about Hands from the Corner. It's pretty nice for a lot of you guys to hear a coach sort of just go over a standard spot that you see every day and just sort of note the differences between the thought processes, the thought process that I would use, then the thought processes that like some of the mods and people on my forums would use, then maybe the thought process of the original poster who might often be like a newer player who's got a bit less experience, and sort of comparing the three and seeing how the thought process evolution actually occurs as you become a stronger and stronger, more experienced player. Today I want to talk a little bit about a c-bet spot. I actually did a podcast for another podcast poker station there where I was asked about c-betting and like how important c-betting is in general as a skill to work on, and I said in that podcast interview that it's just supremely important because it's the spot that comes up the most frequently of all the post-flop situations. Like that's the situation that if you can't handle it, you're really not going to make that much progress as a player, because even though the pot is relatively small in a single raise pot, when you've opened and you have the opportunity to c-bet, like it comes up so frequently that, the small pot will make a huge difference over and over, over the long term as it occurs over and over again, basically. So today we've got a hand posted by one of the moderators on the forum. Now the moderators are chosen as like the best kind of people who have had like the most success either monetarily moving up the stakes or in clarity of feedback or whatever, or both. And they are typically stronger than the other players, but that doesn't mean to say that I can't still correct things that the moderators say or do. So I'll certainly be making a point to do that wherever possible instead of just picking hands from like the newest and weakest of members. I think it's good to look at hands from some of the stronger players too and talk about things that are a little bit more advanced in this podcast as well. So that's what I'm going to do today. So this is called Thoughts on This c-bet. It's not really called that, it's more just like the first line of the post, but it doesn't have a name, so that's as good a name for it as any. This is a c-bet spot, and pre-flop is standard according to original poster. This is just a question on the c-bet. Let's see if I agree. Yep, I do agree. So pre-flop, what happens is that hero is in the hijack with 10 of spades, 10 of hearts. Under the gun folds in a 6max online 25 NL game. And hero raises 3 times the big blind to 75 cents and 3 folds to the big blind who calls. So big blind, we have 288 hands on, so that's a reasonable sample for VPIP, PFR, that kind of thing. 27-22 with a fold to c-bet stat of 75. Now, I don't even really love the fact that the fold to c-bet stat is given here, and the reason for that is that it's not been specified like what the subsample that stat is over is, like, because that could be something like he's folded to, I don't know, like 6 out of 8 c-bets most likely, maybe even 3 out of 4, I don't know, but it's probably not going to be very meaningful over that sample, whereas if it was something like he'd folded to 30 out of 40 c-bets, that would be a lot more meaningful. But I think that stat's probably going to give us more, it's going to cause more harm than good here if we rely on it very literally, because like it's just almost unheard of that anyone that runs 27-22 would ever have a really high fold to c-bet of anywhere above 60%, let alone 75%. I don't even think that it indicates that his stat is that much likely to be higher than 50% than normal. I would just pretty much ignore the fold to c-bet stat and just focus on the fact that this is a loose reg. So far, over 300 hands, he's quite likely to be a looser reg if he's running 27-22. He's likely to be floating the flop probably quite avidly, I would say, if he's a looser player, and you can see that I'm just really relying on that VPIP PFR ratio, and I'm kind of dismissing the fold to c-bet as a stat that we just don't have enough data to really think that it's that meaningful yet. Okay, so the board comes down, Queen of Diamonds, King of Spades, 5 of Diamonds. Again, we have 10 of Spades, 10 of Hearts. So we flop like the dreaded underpair. A lot of students hate flopping this hand. They just feel like it's so awkward to play. And the reason that you feel negative about this hand is that it is actually just a kind of negative EV spot. Like when the board comes down like this, you are going to be losing money from the point of view of post-flop, or from the point of view of the entire hand, I should say. Your job at this point is probably just to pick the line that loses the least money against most opponents. Like it's rare that you'll be against an opponent that you can actually profit from when you have just pocket tens on this board. First of all, I'd just like to I like to go through the original poster, the moderator's logic here first, and just see what he's got to say about the spot, and then I'll give my own feedback on his and on his thoughts. So he goes on to say, so big blind checks the flop, and hero is actually been given here. The hero bets $1 into $1.60, so we've got hero's line. That's not always the best way to post hands. Sometimes it's good to post it from point of decision and just say big blind checks hero question mark. Action 2 hero, what should hero do? You get the picture. But there's nothing wrong with saying this is what I did, what do you think about it, as a line check as well, that's fine. So original poster, our moderator goes on to say here, I was really in two minds about c-betting. There was a post a while back that someone pointed out about betting our whole range, as we have range advantage in this spot. So that's true that in a spot where you have significant range advantage, not just range advantage, but I mean like where it's the case that you have like way more of an uncapped range than Villain does, and Villain just has very few things that can defend. And thirdly, where you don't have that many mediocre hands, where you mainly have like really good hands, or when I say mediocre hands, I mean like you don't have lots of second pair, right? Like on a board like King 7-3, you're not going to have much second pair. But on this board of King Queen 5, you are going to have a lot of second pair. So that's one difference. What second pair is a hand, like when the pair is high, like a pair of queens, it's a hand that's very stable. Like the showdown value is not very vulnerable to overcards. Like only an ace can improve someone to a better hand here as an overcard is concerned. So when you have a pair of queens on King Queen 5, like checking is like something that you quite like to do there, because you can't really extract value. You kind of want to use that as a bluff catcher, get the showdown, control the pot, etc. So when there's two big cards on the flop and you can have more second pair, that's actually a reason to not bet your whole range as is suggested here, and actually look to develop a checking range, because second pair wants to check, and if it's only a couple of combos, it's only like 12 combos, because the only hands that are like stable showdown value are some pocket pairs, then I can forgo having the checking range. But when there's a queen on the board and you've got like ace, queen, king, you've got queen, jack, queen 10, queen 9 suited, that's quite a lot of second pair hands now that want to check. And hands like jacks and 10s also quite like checking here as well. They are again like relatively stable showdown value that benefits more from just taking a free card and letting Villain bluff than it does from like putting a c-bet into the pot and sometimes being raised and stuff like that. So I'd say that there's a big difference between whether you want to range bet. Really depends upon like not just your range advantage and your position. Like you want to range bet your whole range when you have a big range advantage and when you're in position, but you also want the texture to be one on which like neither player has a lot of like second pair hands. Like you want it to be one where you more have like top pair plus as your pairs, and then some weaker pairs that need to be protected. On those kind of textures like King 7-5, like betting the whole range with the range advantage is important, but on King Queen 5 it's less good a strategy because of all those Queen X that want to check, and also just because like Villain is going to defend on this board a lot more often. Like you can imagine on King 7-5 the reg is going to fold more hands like Jack 10, Jack 9, Ace Jack, Queen 10, Queen Jack, Ace Queen. These are all hands that are very combinatorically abundant. I love that term or phrase. I've been using that a lot, combinatorically abundant. It sounds really swanky. In effect, all it means is like there's a lot of combos of those hands, basically. That's kind of patronizing. I'm sure you guys can work out what that means since you're an intelligent audience. So sorry for like patronizing everyone there unnecessarily, but hey, I'm in a ranty mood today, what can I say? So basically, yeah, like when you've got a lot of these second pair hands, like you want to develop a checking range normally for them because they are stable, they're not vulnerable, they're not benefiting that much from being protected, so it makes sense to start checking like your middle pairs back, and it makes a lot of sense to therefore be checking back some weaker hands to also call turns, and then be checking some hands that you want to actually just give up with. So the first choice in these spots, as far as I'm concerned, against the reg, where you're thinking about your range and your strategy as you should be, is do I want to range bet or do I want to polarize? So when you range bet, you bet everything, and like I say, that's more the case on boards that are as dry as King 7-5 when you're in position with a really big range advantage. Fine. Bet everything. What's Villain really going to do about that? Save your checking until the turn, polarize your range on the turn, don't do it on the flop. Okay? When the board's a bit wetter though like this, and it's better for Villain's range, he's continuing more on King Queen 5 than on King 7-5, and when you have all the second pair that want to check, now it becomes more of a case that you want to develop that checking range. So now you need to decide which box tens is going to go into. Now the boxes that you're going to actually have here are going to be c-bet bluff, c-bet value, check back with showdown value to call turn bets, and check back to give up and just be done with a hand and fold to a turn lead from Villain. You need to have all of those boxes against a competent player, because if you don't, you're just horrendously unbalanced. If you only ever check back second pair here and you're always calling turn and folding river, then that's just an awful strategy, because villain can play fit or fold on the turn, or just bet twice, even better, and make you fold your whole range. You need to have some hands that check back, call turn, and not river, some hands that check back, call turn, and river, some hands that check back and fold turn, hands that c-bet bluff and then give up, hands that c-bet bluff and don't give up, hands that bet for value and then check call turn, hands that bet for value and then keep betting, and hands that triple barrel bluff, and you get the picture. You just need all these different sub-ranges to balance each other to have a solid strategy. It's not easy, but when you start thinking about which hands fit which boxes best, you can start to make some headway in actually achieving this kind of balanced strategy. So where does tens fit in then? Certainly it's not going to be a value bet. We don't want to bet it on the flop. Certainly we don't want to turn it into a bluff and bet it as a bluff, because arguably it has a good amount of showdown value here. Thirdly, I don't think we want to check back with it and then fold the turn, because if we do, I think we're just folding far too often. We'd be just giving up like most of the time we check back the flop. Sure, we can call queen X and we can call some weak kings that we check back with on the turn, but I don't think that's enough to make villain indifferent to just bluffing turns with anything, and we need to make him indifferent to that. So we're going to end up checking back this flop to then call turn. I think that's by far the best line here with pocket tens. It makes the most sense. Now, is that weak? Is that a problem if we check back flop then just simply call turn and fold river? Can villain not just bet twice and exploit us? No, because he can't exploit our hand because he doesn't know we have pocket tens. If we flip this hand face up, we could be exploitable, sure, but as long as we're calling river with our best queens and our weak kings when we check back flop and call turn, then we're not going to be unbalanced there. We're going to be okay as long as we make sure that our combo ratios are okay there. So I think the main way that the original poster is going wrong on this thread is that he is choosing to bet, he's choosing to range bet on a flop that he doesn't have a large enough range advantage on, because both players can probably have pocket fives and king queen here. The only hands that he can have that villain can't are like ace king aces, queens and kings, which is quite a lot, sure, but at the end of the day, like, villain still continues a lot on this flop, and you have a lot of second pair that you want to check with. So I think developing a checking range here is pretty important, actually, and I would have a checking range on this flop, and just go from there, basically. Looking to check call turns and rivers with some hands, fold rivers with some hands like pocket tens like this one, and just develop your range boxes so that they're nice and balanced and that villain doesn't have an exploitative angle to take advantage of your strategy, basically. So I want to go through a few of the comments that have been left here as well and give a bit of feedback on those. So someone has said, you block Jack 10, Ace 10 and 9 10, which is true, and have way more King X than villain. These are both true things, which are, I guess, those would be reasons to bet since you have more fold equity, but those are just a small part of villain's range. You do block them, but you just reduce the combo slightly. Like, it doesn't mean that you have loads more fold equity with pocket tens here than you would with, you do have more with tens than you do with like pocket sixes for sure, but not like heaps more or anything like that. So that poster then goes on to say, I think it might work as a protection bet against broadways and diamond draws. Well, when you're protecting, like, what are you trying to do? You're trying to basically stop villain from realizing free equity, like taking free cards that can improve to beat you. You're basically trying to make villain fold draws that are weak, too weak to continue, like 2 overcards, 1 overcard, a gut shot, whatever, something villain's going to fold. So against a flush draw has so much equity against you, you're not protecting anything against that at all. You're just making a bet that's pretty dodgy because the flush draw improves, it handles the turn and river a lot better than you do, and it's doing fine equity-wise against you, so you really gain nothing by betting this flop against a flush draw. Bet the turn, sure, maybe if you knew villain had loads of flush draws, but they're an insignificant part of his range here anyway. He's called big blind against hijack. He's not going to have like loads and loads of flush draws. People always overestimate just how many flush draws there are in someone's range. Poster then goes on to say, I think if we check, we put ourselves at risk for a tough call on the turn. I mean, this is the kind of thinking that I wouldn't worry too much about. Like, sure, you don't know if villain has a better hand or not when he leads the turn, but it's not your job to know. Like, I've put that hand in the call turn box, not because I'm trying to soul read villain and I think that he's going to bluff all day. It's simply because we don't know how villain plays. Like, let's face it, we have very limited information on this guy, or at least not much info has been given in the post. I'm sure we don't have much info, or it would have been given. So why do you expect that we should be able to like know where we are at all points here? Like even if we bet flop and get called, like we've not really solved that much if villain's playing optimally. He can still float us on the flop, he can bluff raise us on the flop. We're never going to know where we are. That's not our priority. Our priority is, since we have limited info, to make sure we're playing our range, not our hand, our range in a balanced way. And that's why we want to check back flop and call turn here. So it's not a tough decision. You've already decided on the flop that you're going to call turn fold river, and that's no problem at all, because you're not trying to solve this hand in a vacuum, because you just can't. You're not psychic. Another comment reads, I prefer a check back. I would see bet smaller pairs that need protection. I wouldn't. I would give up smaller pairs that need protection, because you can't really protect a hand like pocket threes from hands that are just doing super well and aren't going to be folding anyway. Like if villain has jack 10, ace jack, etc., like he's not going to be folding. Like the only hand you really protect against with a hand like pocket threes is something like I don't know, like 8-9 or something like that. Like what is villain realistically folding this flop with that threes is protecting equity when he makes villain fold? Like not very much at all, I don't think. And so I think also you don't have the best hand often enough with threes. Like you need to actually think that you have the best hand loads to bet threes solely for protection, or for that to be the best line. So that would also be something I would disagree with. I think like the notion of betting a tiny pair here is pretty bad, because that tiny pair is the worst hand to c-bet bluff possible, and we want a checking range. We want a range that calls turns. We want a range that folds turns. Threes is clearly a check back to fold turn. It's just the best hand to do this with, the nut hand to check back give up with. Think of your strategy. Don't just think in a vacuum, and you'll do better here. The original poster then goes on to say, the problem I have here is that we cap our range on a flush board. We're not checking back queen, queen plus and king, queen and flush draw as well. Maybe you should check back some. Like you don't, it's okay to have a capped range as long as you call down enough with it. Like you can still make villain indifferent to bluffing you with the capped range, and he can't exploit that, because you're not trying to stop villain from like value betting a strong hand against you. That's not your aim here. It's a ridiculous aim. Your aim here is to stop villain just outright bluffing too much and doing it profitably. So therefore it doesn't matter if your range is a bit capped. Like I would check back some weak kings here as well. Like if I open king 9 suited here, king 10, I'd check that back also, and that strengthens my range there, but it doesn't need to be uncapped. Like if you try to make your range uncapped every time you check the flop, you'll just end up never checking the flop, or you'll end up playing a ridiculous strategy. So like think about that a bit more. Like it's not super important that you keep your range uncapped. It's more important that you just make sure you defend enough of it on the later streets. And your showdown value here is very stable, and it's not vulnerable to, like when you've got a queen here, for example, it's not too vulnerable to being outdrawn, and that's what allows you to play the check back game, and that's why we want the checking range primarily. I could take 9-9 or ace jack or even 3-3 and turn it into a bluff. I mean, again, you need to think more about your strategy here. Like ace jack, I have no problem betting that hand at all. That's no problem because it has loads of equity to the nuts. It's a decent hand. It has very good blockers. But when you start bluffing 9-9 and 3-3, you're literally bluffing far too much, and you're playing a very dodgy strategy on this board, in my opinion. Also, because reverse is big blind, their range is a lot wider than it would be in the small blind, original poster goes on to say. It's absolutely correct. I totally agree with that. I think that when you're playing against the big blind, you can take more liberties and you can afford to range bet on more textures, but I still wouldn't range bet on this texture. Okay, that's my analysis of that hand. I hope you guys enjoyed. The solution is check back, call turn, fold river with this hand, and play lots of other parts of your range in ways that will balance with that, and you'll do fine here. Don't try and soul read like what villain's going to do. Don't try and solve the spot so that you never have to like guess whether to call or fold the turn. You don't have to guess. You just decide to call turn anyway, and that's not based on knowing what villain has when he leads the turn against you. That's a fallacy. You're never supposed to do that in online poker. You just don't know that most of the time. It's based on just having a solid strategy instead. Think more about your own range in your own game and stopping villain from exploiting you, and you'll just do a lot better long term than you will by stabbing around in the dark trying to like soul read what people have or whatever. That's just one of my pet hates. So hopefully that analysis has been useful for that kind of very common and kind of frustrating c-bet spot. I'll see you guys on the next podcast. The book is still up for sale. Go to carrotcorner.com, grab yourself that PDF copy. It is your ultimate Bible. It's your manual for poker. It goes through absolutely everything. I've spent a year and a bit of my life after 5 years of coaching all kinds of players from professionals down to amateurs, and it is literally just my syllabus of everything I know about the game, which is, I'd like to say at this advanced stage of my poker life, being a poker dinosaur, quite a lot. So Grinders Manual is up there. Admin@Carrot Corner is my email address if you want to contact me about anything coaching related, book related, podcast related. Do you want to come on the podcast? Do you think you've got something interesting to add to it? Are you just a student who wants to come on and talk about poker? I can allow that to happen. That's fine. Are you someone with your own podcast? You want to do cross promotion? Give me a shout. Seriously, get in touch. I'd love to hear from more of you guys. I do hear from quite a lot of you these days, but not enough. I want to hear from like everyone out there that listens to this podcast, even if it's just to say, keep up the good work. That gives me motivation to sit down on a Friday and make an episode for you guys. Thanks for watching, and I will see you on the next one. Good luck at the tables. Run good.